Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for linking in today for this webinar hosted by TRIP, looking at the transportation system in Colorado. My name is Rocky Moretti. Moretti is spelled M-O-R-E-T-T-I, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research with TRIP. TRIP is a nonprofit organization in our 50th year based in Washington, D.C. We put out reports at the local, state, and national level looking at surface transportation issues, including traffic congestion, road and bridge conditions, traffic safety, and freight travel, and also the connection between transportation and the economy. The format today with a virtual event is that we are going to, after my comments, we're going to hear from Mike Kopp, the President and CEO of Colorado Concern, Rachel Beck, the Vice President of Government Affairs with the Colorado Springs Chamber of Commerce, and Robin Brown, the Executive Director of the Grand Junction Economic Partnership, and then Tony Milo, Executive Director of the Colorado Contractors Association. After those comments, journalists with questions there's a raise your hand feature, or you can use the chat line to indicate you have a question. You'll be elevated to a panelist, and we'll go ahead and you can direct your question at that point to whoever you want to speak with. Our report, Keeping Colorado Mobile, is based on information that we obtained from the Colorado Department of Transportation, as well as TRIP's analyzing the latest data from a variety of federal transportation sources, the Federal Highway Administration, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The key finding of the TRIP report is that Colorado is one of the fastest growing states in the country, is going to need a significant boost in transportation funding to allow the state moving forward to provide a safe, well-maintained, and efficient transportation system, both to accommodate growing passenger travel, but also growing freight travel. The report finds out that vehicle travel in Colorado is growing at the 7th highest rate nationally, with a 34% increase since 2000. And as we point out in the report, what we've seen obviously since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic was a dramatic drop in travel in Colorado, where travel dropped by 42%. By November, the latest data, travel had returned to about 10% the level the previous year. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously had a significant impact on transportation, and we've seen the reduction in travel, and obviously in the short term, it has given high growth states like Colorado a brief breather from the tremendous pressure on the system. But I think we all anticipate moving forward as growth continues, we're going to see the same type of challenges in moving people and freight in Colorado. The TRIP report includes data broken out for the Colorado Springs, Denver, Northern Colorado, Mesa County, and Pueblo areas. And we'll look at some of that data, but TRIP is also available subsequent to this for more individual interviews. In the Denver area, the TRIP report estimates that traffic congestion is costing the average motorist $1,242 annually as a result of spending an additional 62 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting an additional 26 gallons of fuel annually. The TRIP report finds that in the Colorado Springs area, that traffic congestion is costing the average motorist $838 annually, in the value of the 44 hours annually lost due to being stuck in traffic and the additional 19 gallons of fuel wasted annually. The report also includes a list of the 25 most congested segments of highways across the state. Most of those are interstates or major state highways. Most of them, as you would anticipate, in the Denver and Colorado Springs area, but also in some of the secondary urban areas or tourism areas across the state. We also took a look at the condition of major roads across the state, and this included roads maintained at the state level, but also the local level. That found that 22% of Colorado's major roads have pavements in poor condition, and another 25% are in mediocre condition. TRIP also looked individually at each urban area In the Denver area, the trip report finds that 37% of major roads have pavements in poor condition and another 26% are in mediocre condition. That's costing the average driver $732 annually in additional vehicle operating costs because those rough roads are beating up your vehicles, which accelerates depreciation, but also puts more short-term wear and tear on those. We also look at that in other urban areas. The trip report found in the Colorado Springs area, 30% of major roads are in poor condition and another 25% are in mediocre condition, costing the average Colorado Springs motorist $644 annually in additional vehicle operating costs as a result of the additional wear and tear on their vehicles. We also looked at bridges in Colorado and pointed out that 5% of bridges in Colorado are currently rated in poor condition and in need of immediate repair, and another 54% are in fair condition and need ongoing maintenance to keep them from falling into poor condition. In the Denver area, the report finds that 4% of the region's bridges are structurally deficient or in poor condition, and another 50% are in fair condition and in need of ongoing preservation and maintenance work. The report found that in the Colorado Springs area, 4% of the region's bridges are in poor condition and in need of immediate repair, and another 53% are rated in fair condition. We also took a look at traffic fatalities and pointed out in the last 5 years, we've seen over 3,000 people killed in traffic crashes, including motorists, pedestrian, and bicyclists. And we know that when adequate roadway safety improvements are made, that we see a significant improvement in safety. These improvements can be very cost effective, everything from adding rumble strips to adding turn lanes at intersections, improving facilities for pedestrian and bicyclists. All of these transportation improvements, which can be made when state and local governments have adequate resources, can significantly improve safety. The report also noted that every year, $305 billion of goods are being shipped across Colorado. We've seen during the pandemic how critical that supply chain is. And we've also seen that truck travel has rebounded quicker than passenger vehicle travel as the reality of people being at home more often, having less access to commercial facilities have only increased the need for the movement of goods by large trucks. We anticipate, based on the latest federal data, that truck travel is going to only increase in Colorado over the next 25 years, with the latest estimates that the overall amount of freight shipped in terms of value adjusted for inflation will increase by 82% in Colorado over the next 25 years. The trip report also includes a list of the sections of state highways that are carrying the greatest amount of large commercial vehicles. 7 of those segments carry more than 5,000 large trucks a day. And we also looked at the 10 portions of state highways that carry the greatest share of travel, that is large trucks. Each of those 10 sections, more than 30% of all vehicles are large trucks traveling on those roads. And finally, moving forward, as Colorado and the rest of the country looks for an economic rebound from COVID-19, the report notes that 77,000 full-time jobs in Colorado are directly tied to jobs that are either part of making improvements to the transportation system or jobs created in the economy because of that additional spending. And over 1 million jobs in the state are highly reliant on the quality of the state's transportation system, including jobs in tourism, manufacturing, retail sales, and agriculture. In conclusion, as we look ahead, certainly at the federal level, there's a significant push for additional infrastructure spending. That likely will go, the money ultimately will go through the current surface transportation program in Washington that annually is supplying $570 million to Colorado for road and bridge improvements. But that program expires at the end of September of this year. So it'll be absolutely vital that moving forward, Congress puts in place an adequately and reliably funded federal surface transportation program. With that, we're going to turn it over to Mike Cobb.
Thank you, Rocky. I appreciate that very much. I'm pleased to be joined by 2 of my colleagues in the Way Forward Coalition. One is Robin Brown with the Grand Junction Economic Partnership. The other is Rachel Beck the Colorado Springs Chamber of Commerce, both executive committee members of the Away Forward Coalition. I would just like to comment briefly on some of the findings in the TRIP report that Rocky just discussed. And once again, what we see in the TRIP report is this great demonstration of the high cost to Coloradans and to Colorado businesses of the status quo. And from the perspective of the Away Forward Coalition, there really isn't a business case to sustain the status quo. And so we think that it is time to create a way forward, which is why we've named our organization Away Forward. If you look back just a couple of years ago, we saw two ballot issues. One that would take a step forward in our transportation shortfall by spending general fund money, and it failed. It was in the low 40s. There was another one that raised sales taxes. It failed too. It was in the low 40s. Now our polling that the group Colorado Concern did at that time really demonstrated that both of those were going to land about where they did. And there's nothing in our polling that we've seen since that time that changes our calculus. It looks like there literally is not a 50% plus one coalition for one approach or the other. This is why we're going to the legislature with a framework that says to them, look, people are losing time and money away from their families, away from their jobs. They're taking money out of their paychecks to fix their cars when they otherwise shouldn't have to. It's time to take a step forward. We know going to the ballot is effectively a dead end, and yet we know Coloradans want to see solutions brought forward. They have to. I mean, we are seeing exactly the results of what Rocky has outlined here in the frustration of the motoring public. So we have developed a framework that we've brought to the legislature. We have not seen the bill that the legislature will promote yet, although we have briefed them and others on the framework that we would like to see. And we're especially interested in funding this 10-year plan, which would take a great first step, not the final step by any means, but a very important step forward to alleviate some of the problems that the TRIP report highlights. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robin and Rachel.
Thanks, Mike. We are a Chamber of Commerce, but we are also an economic development corporation. And transportation is one of the top two concerns that we consistently hear about, both from our businesses that we're trying to attract to move to Colorado and bring new jobs here, as well as businesses that are already in the state that want to grow and expand. And specifically, I want to focus on I-25 for a minute. That's an artery that connects about 85% of our population. And it is an artery that is quite literally clogged, as you can see by TRIP's list of the most congested highway segments in the report. And what we're hearing from our businesses that as they're making deliveries up and down the Front Range, as they're moving goods, they're having to shift schedules. Used to take a single day, and they could do it during business hours to deliver their goods across the Front Range. And now they're having to have their drivers work at night or shift those across 2 days instead of one. And so that's less efficient, and it increases labor costs and travel costs. Similarly, our executives who work at branches up and down the Front Range along the I-25 corridor, they tell us, I used to be able to schedule a meeting at my branch in Denver and do something else the very same day. Can't do that anymore. So again, that's lost time and productivity. Tourism is another important industry here in the Pikes Peak region. And we've heard from some of our hoteliers and attractions that if folks fly into the Denver airport and they start coming south down I-25, in some cases they're running into traffic and congestion, and they never even make it to our region. They turn around and those dollars are never spent here in our local economy. Congestion on the southern part of I-25 near Fort Carson is causing delays for service members and civilian employees at those bases. That's another big sector of our economy. And the bulk of I-25 throughout Colorado Springs has a couple segments on the top 25 most congested list. And so those costs that Rocky mentioned, in terms of both literal and opportunity, are significant. He mentioned losing 44 hours of our lives to congestion every year, to the tune of $837 for the average person who lives in Colorado Springs. Deteriorated roads are costing the average person in Colorado Springs $644 a year. That's one I can personally attest to. I'm now on a first name basis with the folks at my local tire and alignment shop. And while it's great to have some new friends, you know, I'd prefer not to be shelling out a couple $100s every time that I see them. And aside from the dollars, you know, that's time and money that we could be putting into things like hiking with our families, you know, working on important projects that will advance our businesses or our community, helping our kids with their homework or their sports teams. And so the costs to our community are significant. Robin, I'll hand it over to you for your comments.
Thank you, Rachel. Weather, accidents, avalanche mitigation, a road infrastructure meant to support 3.5 million residents instead of today's 5 million residents are a constant source of frustration and a huge expense for our companies located west of the Continental Divide. According to the TRIP report, over half of our roads in Mesa County are considered poor or mediocre. Some of our roads haven't been repaved in 50 years, which both hampers our tourism economy and increases freight costs for our rural businesses. Recently, one of our outdoor industry manufacturers announced that they are moving their distribution to Salt Lake City because the cost and unpredictability of freight to Grand Junction has made it impossible to continue their distribution from our rural community. The goal of our coalition is to work collaboratively with the Colorado State Legislature to direct Colorado Department of Transportation to address the future needs of Colorado's transportation system. CDOT has developed a robust 10-year plan that would be the largest investment in rural roads in modern history. The legislature should place new public-facing accountability requirements on the department so that everybody in the state can see which projects are in the 10-year plan, the project status, the project's cost, and how it is funded. We are committed to breaking through the gridlock to deliver this for our rural communities. The time is now. The gridlock must be cast aside, and we must move Colorado forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. I'm Tony Milo, Executive Director of the Colorado Contractors Association, and I'm the final speaker. You've heard from, 3 business leaders across Colorado how important investing in our transportation system is. We've actually got another one on the phone with us here today. Sandra Solon, who represents the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance, is also a member of our executive committee. So we've got every corner of the state, the business leaders from every corner of the state clamoring for improvements to our system. The TRIP report lays out, how much the disinvestment in our system is costing every Coloradan and costing jobs here in Colorado. I just want to remind everyone that, we're living on borrowed time here in Colorado. As underfunded as our system is, and as many problems as we have, we've been borrowing money to supplement our construction program for the last 3 years. We've got one more year under a bill that was passed 3 years ago, Senate Bill 267. We've got one more year of that borrowed money, and then we really fall off the cliff when it comes to transportation funding here in Colorado. So we're urging our legislators and our governor to take action this year. We're here to support them. I want to applaud our legislative leaders and Governor Polis for making this a priority this legislative session. We absolutely have to get it done, and we're here to support our legislators in getting that solution. It won't be perfect. It won't be everything to everyone, but we've got to take that first step.
Thank you, Tony, and all of our speakers. We'll now open it up for questions, and if you have a question, if you can indicate that, then we'll ask you to come onto the panel, and if you choose to turn your camera on so we can have a look at you, that'd be great. Are there any questions at this point? Reaching out to our moderator.
Yes, we've got a question from Joey Bunch.
And please just indicate who you're directing the question at.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh,
Joe.
great, great, great. Well, as I was saying, I have the advantage of having a disadvantage, I guess you'd say, of having been around a long time. And I can tell you that Tony Milo is the optimist on this call, and I'm the pessimist because I've been here on transportation funding so many times. What's different this year? The mountain has always been tall. Now the mountain is taller and covered in ice. What are we going to do? Tony?
Thanks, Joey. And, we appreciate all of your coverage on this issue. And you're one of the best. And we appreciate everything you're doing. And you're right. I mean, it's kind of like Groundhog's Day. Every year we say we've got to get something done. This is the year. But I think that this year we all feel like this is different because we've got the governor and the legislative leaders all saying this is a priority and this absolutely has to be done. So we're putting a lot of faith in our legislative leaders, in our elected leaders to get this done. And again, we're at a point where the cost of doing nothing is going to far outweigh the cost of doing something. And I think having all of the business leaders across the state as well, it's no news that the construction advocate wants more money for transportation, right? But when you get the business leaders that we have here today and all across the state saying we absolutely have to do something, and we're willing to help pay for getting those improvements made. Again, I'm always the optimist, Joey, but I'm hoping we can get it done this year. Looks like Mike has a comment.
Yeah, Tony, would be all right if I add on to your comments. I'd just like to respond to that too, Joey. A couple of notes here. I've never seen, I've been watching this a long time as you have, and I've never seen the alignment from the business community that I see this year. Our organization, A Way Forward, has, I think 55 or so members, maybe not quite that many, over 50 members, business organizations, chambers, trade associations, Farm Bureau. I mean, it really is kind of a powerful expression. But I think the real key for this alignment is something that I think hasn't been talked about a lot, and that is really the power that CDOT has brought to this discussion this year in a new way that I've never seen. And that is they have this 10-year plan formulated. Everybody can see it. And I think just looking back at the past, one of the problems that we've had before is it's been sort of an amorphous blob to people looking at it. People would say, yeah, we need to fund transportation, but what are we funding exactly? And I really think CDOT deserves a lot of credit for pulling this list together. It's engineered, much of it. They've been, in all but 2 or possibly all of the counties in the state and talked to local leaders about this. I've never seen any of that take place before. And so, and they're willing to be accountable in a new way, which I think is really what helps the members of the A Way Forward Coalition congeal support around that. Because you could see that it's pretty focused on a certain outcome that you could actually hold people accountable to produce.
Our next question is from Charles Ashby.
There we go. I turned on my camera, but there's no button for that. So, Mike, you and I have been around the Capitol quite a bit. Me 10 years longer than you. And, we've been talking about this for at least 25 years since I've been there. And certainly longer. It's the same discussion we've had. What I'm hearing right now is that there's still an element in the legislature right now that want this money to come from general fund. They don't want new fees. They're pointing to that ballot measure that passed last year. I'm more skeptical than Joey is. I don't think this is going to happen. You talk about this year after year after year, and we get a few things done here and there, but it never seems to really get to the real problem. And as you pointed out, nobody wants to go to the ballot. Nobody wants to approve it on the ballot. So what makes you think that you can get something done this year that's going to be substantial and not just hitting at the edges?
Hi, Charles. Nice to see your name on my screen. I don't get to see your smiling face. Look, I think there are 2 points of alignment I've seen. Now, these are both reflections of what we've heard from both the Republicans and the Democrats. There's a willingness on the Democrats to commit long-term general fund money to this problem. And there's a willing among many Republicans to do at least one of the fees that we've been discussing, which is something dealing with electric vehicles and bringing some parity there. So we looked at this and those two pieces, along with the state transportation plan, this 10-year plan, as at least building blocks to move us forward. I do have a little bit more of an optimistic outlook, and I hope you're wrong, and I hope, of course, we're right. But we've explained this to everybody we've met with. We've met with a lot of organizations, and they ask many of the same types of questions you ask, and we always tell them this is flawed. There is no flawless transportation policy to put forward, as far as we've discovered. If there's something better, we'll step aside. We're happy to do that. But also the problem, I just think more people own the problem now than I've seen in the past. Another notable aspect of this is, I think you've heard the governor really lean into this. You've heard legislative leaders lean into this, both the Democrats. We do hope Republicans will share in the responsibility of coming to the table and working on this. So we'll see. Maybe a friendly wager off the side, offline, will be in order.
Yeah, I'll take that bet.
Our next speaker is Spencer Humphrey.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? My name is Spencer. I'm a reporter with News 5 here in Colorado Springs, and I am curious. So from looking at the report, here in Colorado Springs, I see that a stretch of Powers Boulevard ranks number 8 on your most congested highways list. And I've talked to CDOT officials in the past about this, because it's long been the plan or the goal that Powers would be a controlled access freeway, where you don't have to stop at those lights. But CDOT officials have told me that, they know that needs to happen, but it's not in their 10-year plan. And I'm just wondering what you make of it, that your findings show that it's one of the top 10 most congested highways in the state, but it's not in CDOT's 10-year plan to, make the ultimate goal of making that a controlled access freeway to give, people in El Paso County an alternative besides I-25.
Hi, Spencer.
Oh, no, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Rocky, and chime in when you're done. Spencer, you're right. Powers has been a very congested part of our community, and where all of the growth is concentrated as well. And so that is a priority for the local community. Now, I've talked to the folks over at the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, which is, I guess, a shorthand would be, the local agency that feeds up our projects and priorities to CDOT. And my understanding was that some of those top projects are in the 10-year plan. One of them was fortunate enough to be funded by some federal stimulus dollars. And so it may have come out of the most recent version because we were fortunate to get those funds. But we have been picking off those interchanges one by one and making some progress. And I think that we'll continue to see that happen, because it is a known priority. Mike mentioned CDOT's recent outreach, and I know that Shoshana Liu has been down in the Pikes Peak region more than any director, certainly that I've seen in the time that I've been working on this topic, which is 20 years now. And so I think that there is an understanding there of the priority of that roadway. Rocky, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to explain that in terms of those rankings, our question to the department was, when you look at what they would call level of service, essentially the ability of that roadway, how many vehicles can it carry versus how many it actually does carry. And so that's how that rankings came together, but I think, I think Rachel is more familiar with it and is also with its status in terms of priorities.
Could I just jump in and add another note to this? A big part of the context for the 10-year plan is getting our roads in a state of good repair across the state. And so, when you think about it, current revenues that come into the state on a current basis, you're always torn. Do we put this into state of good repair projects, or do we put it into new capital expansions? And those are needed. We all know that. This isn't the last transportation move to be done, but I mean, I guess what we all recognize is that moving and really focusing on many state of good repair projects from around the state also allows you to take current funding and move it into some of these bigger capital expansion projects. And just as a practical note, there's large ones on I-70 that are being talked about, but they're still in environmental review, and it's so complicated. There are so many levels and steps, I guess, that so much of this has to run through. But I thought that was important context to throw in here.
Please note, Charles and Joey, I have lowered your hands. If you have a follow-up question, just raise them again. And our next question comes from Ed Seelover.
Great, thank you very much. My questions are actually for Rocky. Two things, Rocky. First of all, this is a little technical, but in terms of the 1,232 average cost for congestion in Denver, can we add that together with the 732 average per driver costs in badly repaired roads to say that it's $2,000 a year that it's costing Denver drivers, or are those is the 732 incorporated in the 1,232?
Yeah, certainly you can add them. Those numbers are mutually exclusive. One is looking at when roads are in poor condition, several things happen. One, vehicle depreciation accelerates. Your car's wearing out quicker, you're using more gas, your tires are wearing out quicker, and just the routine repairs and maintenance that a vehicle would normally require are also increased. The other metric, the congestion metric, looks strictly at what is the amount of lost time. I mean, we all spend time, traveling and driving. This is what's the additional time that can be directly tied to the level of traffic congestion. And conversely, it's not how much fuel you use in a year, but how much of that additional fuel are you burning due to traffic congestion. Of course, if you're burning more fuel, you're also having higher emissions. So although it's not quantified, there's also an environmental concern. So yeah, you could add them together. The only thing I'll point out is this report, we did not get into a specific regional estimate of safety costs, which we did in our 2018 report, I believe. So just if anyone is comparing this report to the current report, really, you would need to just look at the additional vehicle operating costs and the congestion costs and compare it back to what TRIP has reported in the past.
Great. And the second question is about comparison's sake in two ways. One, how do these costs compare to past years? Are they actually that 1,232, that 732 for the Denver area? Are they growing? And second, how do Denver costs compare to other metro areas? Do you have a list of that? Can we put in perspective whether this is good, middle range, horrible?
If you look at the congestion numbers, as you would anticipate, and these numbers are from 2019, they were continuing to grow. Obviously, in Colorado, certainly in Denver, we've seen traffic congestion increasing. Obviously, with the pandemic, we're seeing travel drop dramatically, and there's beyond that, there are changes in terms of where people are going to work, where they're going to live, which modes they'll choose to use that are still to be determined as we move forward. But certainly in Colorado, with its tremendous level of growth and tremendous amount of economic growth that's going to occur, you would anticipate that after this brief respite, if you will, to travel growth that it's going to return.
And versus national cities?
Although I don't have all those numbers in front of me, it's consistent now. It's moving into the ranks of some of the larger cities, and you know, and if you reach out to me after this call, certainly we can look up some of those numbers. In terms of urban pavement conditions, Denver now has, and also Colorado Springs for that matter, are now moving above the national average. Typically what we see across the country is urban roads are in worse condition than rural roads. And that's largely a function that they're much more heavily traveled, a lot more large trucks. It's not to say that you can't have urban roads in good condition. If they're built and maintained appropriately, roads with any level of traffic can be kept in good condition. But as you would anticipate, that requires more investment at the urban level.
Thank you.
We have a question from Ray Solomon.
Hi, Ray Solomon from KUNC. I have two questions as well. The first one is, I was hoping you could provide a little bit more context to the poor rating of, I think it was 5% of the state's bridges. What exactly does that mean, poor? Are we talking about at risk of failure?
If a bridge was at risk of failure, it would be closed. Bridges are inspected regularly. And just the category traditionally by Federal Highway Administration, which requires that every bridge 20 feet or longer across the country, regardless of who maintains it, is inspected at least every 2 years, and data is submitted for those facilities. Traditionally, that was called a structurally deficient bridge, probably a better description. The federal government now is just gone to a simple poor, fair, good matrix. But if you look at what that means, a bridge in poor condition, the engineers, part of their inspection, have noticed significant deterioration of the key components. It's deck, it's the superstructure that supports it, or the structure that actually would be right underneath the deck of a bridge. And so if they felt that bridge couldn't stay open, they would close it, or what happens many times is they restrict it to lighter weight vehicles. As you could imagine, if you start restricting a bridge's use, it has significant public safety concerns and in terms of emergency vehicles, and also economic concerns if you can't move a truck over a major bridge. The bridge and fare category, which is approximately half of the state's bridges, the challenge there is the engineers have noted some deterioration, but they're typically deterioration that can be addressed very cost effectively. The challenge is if a transportation agency doesn't have the resources in place to make those repairs, then bridges fall into poor condition, where the cost of those repairs, and in some cases ultimately replacement, are significantly higher.
So the poor classification or poor condition is like before the repairs get a lot more costly. And
well, the poor category, the repairs are already going to be costly, and in some cases, some of those bridges actually will need to be replaced. But bridge engineers will say that the bridges built more than 50 years ago, which is about a third of Colorado's bridges, just the materials and the techniques used really limit ultimately how much longer those bridges can be kept open, and that impacts major bridges, including interstate bridges. Bridges built more recently typically are built to longer design standards, but again, the poor category are bridges that need work now, and the fair category are bridges that can still be preserved and maintained with a lot of routine work, but if you don't stay on top of that, then you're looking at a far costlier repair need.
yeah, thank you. And then my second question is, if the 10-year plan that you're talking about, if that includes any investment in public transportation to try to take some of the pressure off of these overstressed roads.
I think I'll ask some of the other speakers who might have a better sense of the state's 10-year plan.
I can speak up. There is in the 10-year plan, there is a ratio of that, a portion of that, pardon me, that will go to cities, local governments, and in that instance, they would have latitude as to the way that they spend those. I would expect it would look differently, probably depending on which municipality it went into. And Tony's always our kind of North Star on this. Anything I should have added to that, Tony, that you can think of?
Thanks, Mike. I missed, my internet broke up just a little bit there on Ray's question. Ray, can you repeat the question one more time for me?
Yeah, I was just asking you about investments included in the 10-year plan for public transportation to take some of the pressure off of the overstressed roads that Rocky was talking about.
Okay, yeah. So the 10-year plan, CDOT's 10-year plan does include some transit and multimodal options of statewide significance. And then, as Mike said, all of the money that goes into the HUTF, the Highway User Tax Fund, a portion of that is shared with local governments, and local governments have full flexibility to use that money how they wish. So depending on the priorities of that region and that the city and the county, some of that money can also be used for local transit and multimodal needs as well.
I'll just add a couple specifics. In the 10-year plan, it calls for additional buses for the Bustang service, which is, as you probably are familiar with, an express bus service that travels some of the arteries in the state and does longer term service, as well as increasing what they're calling mobility hubs, which would give people more access to things like Bustang, as well as carpooling opportunities and other transit services.
Our final question is from Charles Ashby.
Okay, thanks for letting me ask another question. So over the years, I've heard numerous arguments in favor of finding ways to fund more transportation, nothing better than economic development, what it does to businesses, people in traffic and not wanting to do that. But now you have this new narrative that I've heard only recently in the last few weeks or months about what this impact is for motorists, for them, spending not as much time with their families, with their cost repairs to their vehicles. If those other arguments, previous arguments, weren't good enough, and they were good arguments, what makes you think that argument is better, is more of a winning narrative? Rocky?
Well, I think the issue of convenience and reliability, I think was jumping to the forefront as we were seeing growing traffic congestion. I think the pandemic, has really, I think for everyone, really focused them more on what they truly value. And it's given them certainly a lot more flexibility in where they work and where they choose to live. And to some extent now, you're going to see the people with really an option to really decide which communities are moving forward, and infrastructure is a big part of that. There's other things, healthcare, education, but certainly people and employment opportunities and really energy are going to be drawn to areas that show a commitment to a vibrant society, and that certainly includes good infrastructure. And certainly people have options if they think some states or some areas are not addressing these challenges. So I think the quality of life issues are very vital. And I think people recognize that the quality of the transportation system, certainly the safety of the transportation system and its reliability are very important to them. So we think, obviously, as hopefully we're moving into the last legs of this pandemic, from a public policy perspective, the public are going to look very closely at which regions are really addressing their needs and their challenges.
All right, thanks.
I believe that's the end of the questions.
Okay, well, I'm going to thank everyone, and particularly our speakers who took time to speak with us today. Throughout the day, the TRIP organization, we're happy to continue this dialogue, and there's contact information on all of our material, and certainly the other speakers. I'm sure there's ways to reach them as well. But again, thanks everyone for participating in the webinar. And if there are follow-up questions from journalists, please contact us. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.